Hello, my name is Jeffery Deaver, and I'm delighted to be here at the Carmel Foundation and share some of my thoughts about writing books and stories. Now, I have been an author full-time now for about 35 years. I have written 45 novels, 70 or 80 short stories, a country western album, radio plays, nonfiction law book, much poetry, journalistic articles. But one thing I've never tried is plagiarism, and I thought I'd give that a shot today. Now, what I mean by that is that I've been working on a book about writing for a few years. And the approach I'm taking on that is to select quotations from authors who are far more articulate and intelligent than I, and using that as a springboard to discuss how I approach writing. So the plagiarism part is, yes, I'm stealing their sentences with full attribution. So as a former copyright lawyer, I think that probably doesn't fall into the rubric of plagiarism, but you get the idea. And that's what we're going to be doing today, looking at a book from its conception through essentially the completion, using as a springboard, again, quotations from other authors. And then I'll talk about how I do the process. First, however, some caveats. And since I'm using this technique of quoting other authors and then going into a discussion on my thinking, these two caveats are going to be in the form of quotations from other authors. And here's one from Lillian Hellman, who said this. Lillian Hellman, by the way, was the great writer for the New Yorker in the 1920s and 30s, sat at the Algonquin Hotel roundtable. She said this: "If I had to give writers any advice about writing, I would say never listen to writers giving you advice about writing." The second quotation is from Somerset Maugham, and he said this: "There are three simple rules for writing a great novel. Sadly, no one knows what they are." Well, with all respect to these fine, if somewhat disparate authors, I believe that given a desire to write and a willingness to put in the sweat labor that's involved, and a fair command of your chosen language, you can learn the skills to become a writer. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. I do want to say this, however: there is nothing more subjective than writing. If it works for you, it works. End of story. So please understand that I'm not trying to sell you on my approach to writing. I'm simply saying, here's what's worked for me. Imagine this as an older Jeff talking to a younger Jeff just getting started in the business all of those many years ago. Or you could simply say, here I am musing about what's worked for me. And if you come away with a little tidbit, that's all the better for it. So let's begin. Chapter 1, again, working in sort of the chronological approach of crafting a book. Chapter 1 is why write? Why do we pursue this wonderful, marvelous thing called writing creatively? William Safire said this: "I write because I enjoy expressing myself, and writing forces me to think much more coherently than I do when I'm just shooting my mouth off." Reynolds Price: "I write because it's the only thing I'm really very good at in the whole world." Jonathan Safran Foer: "Why do I write? It's not that I want people to think I'm smart or even that I'm a good writer. I write because I want to end my loneliness. Books make people less alone. That, before and after everything else, is what books do. They show us that conversation is possible across distance." James Thurber: "I want to write because it's so much fun." William S. Burroughs: "As a young child, I wanted to be a writer because writers were rich and famous. They lounged around Singapore and Rangoon smoking opium in a yellow pongee silk suit. They sniffed cocaine in Mayfair and lived in the native quarter of Tangier, smoking hashish and languidly caressing their pet gazelle." Well, who doesn't have that as on their bucket list, of course? Why do I write? I write because I was a nerd. But you see, I was a nerd when the word nerd meant something. I was pudgy, clumsy, socially inept. I had no talent for sports whatsoever. I was uniformly ignored by the cheerleaders and pom-pom girls. Nerd nowadays means you're a billionaire and you invented some kind of social networking platform. Nope, not me. I was a Leave It to Beaver kind of nerd. I did this presentation once, and a young girl came up to me afterwards, and she said she wasn't happy. She said, "Mr. Deaver, I'll have you know that Justin Bieber is not a nerd." I asked her to have her parents, or more likely grandparents, tell her who the Beaver was on Leave It to Beaver. I remember being in gym class, and the coaches on each of the respective teams trying to figure out a psychological mind game, how to make sure I ended up on the other fellow's team. And that made some sense, because I would stand out in the right field. Right field is where you can do the least damage in softball, because not many balls are hit out there. And I would I'd stare up at the sky and see a cloud, ignoring the game completely. And I'd say, wow, that cloud looks like a dragon. I'll bet I could write a story about that. That's what I'm going to do. And I composed poems. I remember one poem I composed was something like this. The score is tied, 3 boys on base. I see the batter's happy face as he grips the bat and looks my way. All I can do is hope and pray that he won't hit the ball to me. But we all know how it goes. He whacks that ball and it breaks my nose. But the sports didn't matter. The cheerleaders and pom-pom girls didn't matter, because I had something better. I had the Glen Ellen, Illinois Public Library. Afternoons and weekends, I was there. And I think that's where I learned about the importance of books. I knew that books could take us away from our daily cares. Books would teach us about things that we, in those pre-internet days, had no other way of learning about. And books did something else that was equally important, maybe even more important. Do you remember when maybe you were the new kid in school? Your parents had just moved to a new town and you didn't know a soul, and you were standing in the schoolyard all by yourself. And then you'd look across the playground and see somebody holding a book, maybe a Little House on the Prairie, maybe The Hobbit. And you'd walk up to them very shyly, of course, and wouldn't look them in the eye, but you would still nonetheless say, hey, pretty good book. That's a pretty cool book. Did you get to the orcs yet? And they looked up at you and your eyes met and they smiled and you smiled, and suddenly you were friends. You didn't know them from Adam or Eve, but that didn't matter. Books had brought you together. I knew that because books did that, I wanted to be a writer, and that's why I write. Well, if we're going to write, let's look at chapter 2, finding a subject to write about. Francine Matthews, I always heard, write what you know. I disagree. I say, write what you love. You can always research the rest. Stephen King said, writers remember everything, especially the hurts. Strip a writer to the buff, point to the scars, and he'll tell you the story of each small one. From the big ones, you get novels. A little talent is a nice thing to have if you want to be a writer, but the only real requirement is the ability to remember the story of each and every scar. Meg Cabot said, write the kind of story you would like to read. People will give you all sorts of advice about writing, but if you're not writing something you like, no one else will like it either. Francine Matthews, don't write to fill a gap in the market. It'll be gone by the time you get there. Flannery O'Connor, any writer who has survived childhood has enough information about life to last him for the rest of his days. What do I write about? Well, I make a living as a novelist, so I'm very conscious of the market, and I actually do have a market-based idea, a market plan to tell me what to write about. And the market plan is this. I call it the mint-flavored toothpaste marketing plan. And by that I mean this. Let's say I was a product designer at Procter & Gamble, and I go to my boss and I say, Joe, I've got an idea for this new product. I had pate last night for the first time. You know pate? He says, yeah, liverwurst. And I say, yeah, that's right. It's pretty good, isn't it? He says, yeah, what's your idea? And so I say, well, how's this? We make liver-flavored toothpaste. Nobody's ever done it before. It'll put us on the map. We will get publicity. we'll get sales. It's going to be the hottest thing that we've ever had in the last 10 years. Well, Joe looks me up and down and says, Jeff, I got 2 questions for you. The first question is this a product for cats and dogs? Because now that's a pretty good idea. And I say, no, it's for people. And he asks his second question, Jeff, is your resume in order? Why? Because people don't want liver-flavored toothpaste. They want mint. They want cinnamon. When we write books, we have to make them mint-flavored books. That is, books that people like. People don't turn to books to be bored or have a bad taste in their mouth. Mickey Spillane said this. He said, people don't read books to get to the middle. Think about it. We don't read a book to get to the middle, page 400 of an 800-page book. We want to get all the way to the end. And I want to make sure people race through the book, a roller coaster, ups and downs, twists and turns and surprises, and get there safe and sound at the end, because we want to get off the roller coaster at the end. But we just want to make sure the story moves forward. I look for ideas that do that. You land at the airport in a strange town, you get into a taxi, you give the driver your address for the hotel, and he turns where you think the opposite direction of where the hotel is. And you keep going and going, it's getting darker and darker, and you rap on the window and he doesn't pay attention. And then you realize there are no door handles on the inside, the opening of the bone collector. I want people to turn pages over and over and over again. I raise questions on actually at least every chapter, sometimes several times a chapter. I raise questions, I raise conflicts, and then at the end, I resolve all of those questions. All the twists are explained. Because if you don't explain them, if your book ends ambiguously, I think that's a case of a liver-flavored book, and we can't have that. So that's what do we write about? I look for ideas that move the story forward very quickly. Conflict, 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 question, 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 move, move, move. And always keep in mind, mint is better than liver. Chapter 3 is about planning the novel. Gustave Flaubert said this, books aren't made the way babies are. They're made like pyramids. There's some long pondered plan, and great blocks of stone are placed one atop the other, and it's back-breaking, sweaty, time-consuming work. Joyce Carol Oates, the first sentence can't be written until the final sentence is known. Ernest Hemingway. Prose is architecture, not interior decoration. I'm talking about outlining. The world of writers is divided into 2 categories, the plotters, outliners, and pantsers, as in seat of thee. The plotters organize ahead of time. The pantsers look at a blank screen or an empty computer screen or a pad of paper, and they just start writing. I am a plotter. I'm an obsessive plotter. I do an outline. I spend about 8 months working on the outline before I write a single word of the prose. The outlines, for instance, my latest book, The Goodbye Man, the outline was about 140 pages long. I know where all the scenes are going to take place. I know where every character enters the story and then leaves the story, either vertically or horizontally, because not everyone exits my books intact. I know where all the clues are seeded into the book, because I do have a lot of surprise endings, plural, and to make sure those endings work as twists, I need to know where all the clues are put into the book. And I have to do that. I need a roadmap to do it. Now there are two main reasons for outlining. One is that thrillers, in fact, I'll go so far as to say all novels are about structure as much as they are about fine prose. In fact, I'll even say structure is more important. My analogy would be one of my favorite classical era composers, Beethoven. Beethoven did not put 5 vivace movements, one right after the other, because by the time you get to the 4th, you're bored. As exciting as the first one was, the 4th one is going to be boring. By the same token, he did not have 5 adagios, one right after another, because by the time you got to the third or fourth adagio, you would be asleep. He interspersed them very cleverly with themes that were integrated throughout the movements, but nonetheless, the story starts, we pose a theme, and then it builds through the ups and downs, crescendo, big climactic movement, and then there was the coda at the end, that a soft reconciliation of the themes. Well, that's what books should be. I firmly believe that. And more structurally that than Schoenberg and some of the more experimental music. I like classic structure. That to me is mint, not liver. That's one reason to write. How about another reason? I'm sorry, one reason to write from an outline. Another reason to write from an outline, because some books simply should not have been written. And admit that to yourself, right? Have you ever read a book that should not have been written? Of course you have. We all have. Well, how does that happen? Usually happens this way. You come up with a brilliant idea, a set piece opening. You know, a set piece is a very exciting scene. It could be a car chase, a gunfight, or not necessarily violent. A couple could go through a very difficult breakup or something like that, or someone could get lost at sea. Their ship floats away. Very exciting scene. And you come up with this idea, and bang, you sit down and start writing it, and out it comes. You write the entire chapter in who knows what, like an hour. Out it comes. But you don't stop there. You keep going. Right. Chapter 2's done, then chapter 3. Well, long about chapter 5 or 6, after you've written a couple hundred words, the story isn't coming quite so easily to you. And by the middle of chapter 6, you come to a complete screeching halt. You look at what you've done, and then you look at the projected middle of the book, and then you look toward the end of the book. And at the middle, all you can see are these cliches in a crime book. The captain has an argument with the ace detective and takes away his gun and badge. And the ending, you can't think of who the bad guy is. You just don't have the villain. So you're going to have him just be the next door neighbor who we've never met before. No character development. It's called a Deus Ex Machina ending, an unearned ending. But you can't figure out how to do it any other way. Well, you're confronted with two choices now. And you're going to gather how I feel about each of these by the way I describe them. Okay, number one. You can do the cowardly, morally reprehensible, intellectually dishonest thing and put in those cliches in the middle and tack on that Deus Ex Machina ending, and then off it goes to the printer, and you have given your readers liver-flavored toothpaste, and that, of course, is simply not acceptable. Or you could figure out how I feel about this, the courageous, the morally upright, the intellectually honest thing, and throw it out. Is every last word. Well, both of those are very difficult to do, obviously, but you simply cannot put a bad book out there, and you simply are going to have to swallow the wasted month or 2 or 3 or 4 that you spent on crafting those first 7 or 8 chapters that aren't going to go anywhere and that you had to throw out. But now consider this. What if you were to take that set piece beginning and put it, just a notation about it, on a Post-it note and stick it up on your bulletin board, and then step back and take more Post-it notes and try to come up with other plot ideas for the novel. And after a week, you put maybe 8 or 10 of those Post-its up, and you realize there's no middle, there's no ending. So what do? You wad up those Post-it notes, throw them out, and start over again on a new idea. You've wasted a week, maybe less, more likely less time than that. And you will not have to go through the agony of the either throwing the book out or the the injustice, let's say, of releasing a book that was not up to par. Well, so there we have the novel is now outlined. It's plotted out if you're following what Jeff does. So we've got the planning the novel. And I should say that not everyone plots there are a lot of pantsers out there. Lee Child, who created the wonderful Jack Reacher series, George R.R. Martin, who created Game of Thrones. They have said they don't outline. Out comes the book, and there it is. And they make wonderful, wonderful works of fiction. But again, the outline is what works for me. My mind doesn't quite work that way. I need to get it down on Post-it notes and then on paper. And mechanically, that's what I do. I start on the big board. I get about 60 Post-it notes of each scene. Then I move it to the computer, and the outline isn't really in like Sister Mary Elizabeth's grade school outlining form, Roman 1, Arabic A, number, standard A, Arabic numbers, and so forth. I just do the bullet points for each scene. Okay, now we've got the outline done. We're going to look at chapter 4, writing the novel. Okay, we have Nathaniel Hawthorne, who said this: a writer's words should dissolve into pure thought. I think this is brilliant. A writer's words should dissolve into pure thought, meaning we don't want the readers to focus on a particularly scintillating passage without knowing what it means. Figures of speech are brilliant. Big words, words you have to look up in a thesaurus. That's just, it could be brilliant, National Book Award type writing, but nonetheless, we need to know what the meaning is. Stephen King, any word you have to hunt for in a thesaurus, speaking of which, is the wrong word. Now, I'm quoting a lot of wise, sage, erudite literary thinkers in my discussion today. I'm going to turn to one of my favorites, Dr. Seuss. He said this: it has often been said there's so much to be read, you can never cram all those words in your head. So the writer who breeds more words than he needs is making a chore for the reader who reads. That's why my belief is the briefer the brief is, the greater the sigh of the reader's relief is. And that's why your books have such power and strength when you publish with short. Short is better than length. In writing, as in so many other things in life, less is often more. Stephen King, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Samuel Goldwyn, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union. Meaning, of course, your novels are not about preaching. They are about telling a story that then evokes within you the concept of what the author's theme is. Mark Twain, a successful book is not made up of what is in it, but what is left out. As for me, once the outline is done, I can write quickly. I can do 130,000 words in about 2.5 months. I can write in any order I want. I can do the beginning at the book at the end at the beginning, the middle, whenever I want. And it's very helpful. You wake up on a beautiful day, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, and you look at your outline and you're scheduled to viciously murder somebody that day, and you just don't feel like it. The day is too nice. So you can go on to something else. When I want to murder somebody in my books, I'm a writer, correct? Well, what's the number one thing we writers like to do? Find excuses not to write. And what is the number one best excuse for not writing? Yes, watching videos of baby goats dressed up in pajamas and frolicking in barnyards. And if you haven't seen them, you got to. They're just wonderful. Well, so let's say I wake up one morning, and it's great. I don't feel like writing. I'm going to put on my computer and watch some baby goats for a while. The cable's out. Oh no, what am I going to do? There's no internet. I immediately call the cable company. They say, well, we'll get somebody out there at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And so my hands shake all day, and I do write. No excuses not to write. I get some writing done. And then next morning I get up early, which I don't like to do anyway. Why? Because I'm a writer, and writers never get up early. So I get up at 7:30, and then 8 o'clock comes and goes, and 9 o'clock comes and goes, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 4:30, the cable guy finally knocks on my door, and he walks in and he looks down and says, well, you got a KP42 cable box. I can't work on that. And it's his cable company, it's his cable box, I would think, but I just am about to scream. Those are the days when I want to kill somebody. And you know what I do in my outline? I go back and I globally search for the name of a victim and remove that and put the cable guy's name in. And I kill him a little more viciously than I would have. Maybe I torture him first. But in any event, the outlining process allows me to do that. I can write the book in any order. Now, I just want to say a word about the tools of our trade, and that is the grammar, rules of grammar, punctuation, and syntax. Syntax, if you're not familiar with that, is word order. Yoda, a butcher of syntax, is. You have to know the rules, certainly. But remember what Nathaniel Hawthorne said, it's all about clear communication. So you can break the rules as long as the communication is clear. I have to say, I kind of draw the line at the sentence, not in dialogue, but in prose. Say you're writing first person, me and him are going down to the beach. That's not what I learned, and it's just jarring. And of course, if you want to do that, you want to use non-standard constructions, just ask yourself, is it going to irritate your readers? Who should I give the gun to? Well, it's not correct. We need objective case there. Whom should I give the gun to? But you, the author, have to ask yourself, am I going to irritate the readers more by using proper grammar and sounding a little highfalutin, or am I going to irritate them by using improper grammar and making them irritated at the error? You just have to ask yourself. Just have to ask yourself that. I use non-standard constructions in cases like this. When I walked into the room, I saw the body on the floor. Now, the Chicago Style Manual will say, when I walked into the room, comma, I saw the body on the floor. It's an adverbial clause. But the fact is there any confusion there at all? I don't think so. And a comma is a speed bump. I try to use as few of them as I possibly can. Commas are absolutely vital, however. You have to be sure that they don't distort the meaning of the sentence and you're writing. And by way of illustration, did you hear about the terrible crime? Oh, it was just awful. Someone walked into a restaurant, pulled out a gun, shot another patron and fled. Well, the ace detective comes in with his assistant and he sits down and listens to what happened and he nods and he says, okay, I know who did it. And the assistant said, but detective, we need to do the forensics, get that, all that Lincoln Rhyme stuff. We need to get the DNA and the fingerprints and footprints. The detective says, no, we don't need to do that. I know who the killer is. The killer's a panda. And the assistant says, a panda? Yeah, that's right. Because I saw a special last night on TV and it said a panda eats shoots and leaves. One advantage of the remote presentation is I can't hear you all groaning, which I suspect you are right now. Commas make a big difference in many circumstances. So don't use them if you can avoid it, if you can get away with it, but be sure to put them in if the meaning would be compromised. If you're interested in the topic of grammar, look for some books like Strunk and White's Elements of Style. There's a wonderful book called Woe Is I, and yes, there is a book called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. Now again, we're doing the book in chronological order. We've just talked about writing the book, that is putting the words down on paper. Now let's look at chapter 5, editing and revising. Ernest Hemingway said, there are no great writers, there are only great rewriters. Elmore Leonard, if it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. For myself, I rewrite 30, 40 times, largely because I bang out my first draft very quickly in that 2.5 months, and the book is too long and it's kind of sloppy at that point because I want to get the ideas down. I do half of my edits on the computer. That's very helpful if you want to do a global search and replace. You may, despite your outline, you may decide that the action in chapter 3 probably would be better in chapter 5. And so cutting and pasting on your computer is very easy to do that. There are, of course, spell checking and grammar checking, which you can't rely on exclusively, but they can be very helpful. But once that's done, then you have to print the book out, because you will see things on the printed page that you did not see on the computer screen. And maybe some of you folks in the audience are, I don't know, linguists, neurolinguists, medical folks. There has to be some physiologic reason why we process the reading experience differently on the printed page than we do on the screen. But it is a richer experience, and you certainly can find mistakes more easily on the printed piece of paper. Now, as deadlines occur all the time, this last year I've written 2 novels, about 8 short stories, and some audio.com original audio teleplays, or audio plays, I guess you'd call them. It's very, very busy. But if there's any way, let your manuscript sit for as long as you possibly can, and then come back to it after a month or 2. Approach it like a reader who's not that familiar with the story, and you will find that you will see things that you took for granted that you're going to have to explain better in the next draft. Now, finally, something I just learned, I've been doing this for the last year, you should listen to your book too. I have a program called Natural Reader. I think Word has the same thing. Microsoft word processing has the same sort of thing. And you just call your book up and it will read it, and it does a pretty good job. Then you follow along on the printed manuscript, and you will find mistakes even after you've been through the printed page typo check. It's amazing. I don't understand how it works, but maybe it's just my mind, because my mind does tend to jump around a little bit and kind of jump ahead. So that's the 3 rules about rewriting, and I think Papa Hemingway would approve. We review it on the computer, and then we review it on the printed page, and then we take the printed page, but listen to it and follow along with our reader. Okay, now we're up to chapter 6. Oh my, writer's block. And I'm not going to give you the name of this wise, sage, erudite author. I'm going to let you figure it out by giving the quote. It was a dark and stormy night. Whew. Good writing is hard work. That, of course, is Snoopy the Beagle. And I'm sorry, I do have to give this quotation now with full awareness of my wonderful friends in the audience and the wonderful foundation that has asked me to speak. But here's the quote. Terry Pratchett: "There's no such thing as writer's block. That term was invented by people in California who can't write." My apologies. Douglas Adams: "I love deadlines. I like the whooshing sound they make as they go by." Larry Kahaner: "I don't believe in writer's block. Do doctors have doctor's block? Do plumbers have plumber's block? No, we all have days when we don't feel like working, but why do writers turn it into something so damn special by giving it a faintly romantic name?" Well, I agree with all of the above, frankly, except for the California part. There's no such thing as writer's block. If you have an idea, you can write it. But there is, however, idea block. And this relates to what I was referring to earlier about the outlining. Let's say you come up with a great idea, but during the Post-it note process on your bulletin board, you realize, this isn't going to go anywhere. It's not an idea. Well, I said wad up the Post-it notes and throw it away. Maybe put them in a shoebox somewhere, or transcribe them to your computer, a Word file, and save it for future ideas. I have had an idea for a novel, a thriller that goes backwards for many years. Starts with the last chapter and then goes prior in time to the first chapter. And the big surprise is in the first chapter. I tried for 10 years and just couldn't get it to work. But finally, after 10 years, an idea occurred to me, and I was able to write that book, and it became the October list and did quite well. So I'm glad I didn't give up on the idea entirely. So if you do have an idea and you're blocked, put it aside. But if you are blocked, it's probably for a reason. So I would recommend, don't necessarily set fire to the thing, but put it aside and move on to something else. Chapter 7 is a chapter we all have to deal with in this business: critics and rejection. Sebastian Junger said, "I wrote my first novel in 7th grade, longhand in a green composition notebook. My teacher read it aloud to the entire class, chapter by chapter. No wonder I didn't have any friends." Neil Gaiman, "Remember, when people tell you something's wrong or doesn't work for them, they're almost always right. When they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong." David Mitchell, "If you show someone something you've written, you've given them a sharpened stake. You're lying down in your coffin and you say, 'Whenever you're ready.'" Saul Bellow, "I discovered that rejections are not altogether a bad thing. They teach a writer to rely on his own judgment and to say in his heart of hearts, 'To hell with you.'" As for myself, I have had hundreds of rejections. I'll give you 2 of my favorites. You all know what a self-addressed stamped envelope is. They don't make them, I guess, with email, but that's when you want to submit a manuscript to a publisher. In the old days, you would bundle up the manuscript, put it in an envelope, along with another envelope addressed back to you and sufficient postage on it, so that if your publisher liked it, they could either send you back a big bag of gold and a contract for your next 10 novels, or more likely, they would send you back the manuscript, ideally with a letter, a well-crafted letter of criticism and so forth. Well, mine came back, self-addressed stamped envelope, and I shook it, and there was no gold inside. I opened it up, and it was my manuscript. In fact, it had, however, been dropped on the floor, and those are the days when you could still smoke, and there was like a cigarette butt and ash mixed in with it. And instead of a pithy and helpful editorial letter giving me guidance, there was my own cover letter upside down with a footprint on the back. I guess, okay, was what I had to deal with. All right, fine. Sent the manuscript out again. It came back, and this one actually did have a letter that said, typed out. I know, because I rather pathetically felt the back of it, and I could feel the raised type from the typewriter back in the old days. And I read it and said, "Dear Mr. Deaver, thank you for your submission. This book is unpublishable. Very truly yours." Well, I took that as a great sign of encouragement. I ignored the unpublishable part, but I saw "thank you" and "very truly yours," which I took as great signs of encouragement and kept at it. Rejection, my theory about rejection is it's a speed bump. It's not a brick wall. You never let it stop you. And indeed, some forms of rejection and criticism can be quite helpful. I was at a book signing somewhere some years ago, and the bookstore was right next to a retirement community. And a woman in her, I guess she'd be in her 90s or so, she came up to me and she said, "Mr. Deaver, I have a question, and this is about the violence in your books. And we're in a book group, and I kind of drew the short straw to go ask you the question, and I hope you don't mind." I said, No, I want to hear about it. So about the violence, what do you think?" And she said, "Well, I'll tell you, to be honest, we think you're going soft on us. The Bone Collector, you scalded that one couple to death. We love that. And then you had rats crawling all over that girl. But in this latest book, I don't think anybody actually died. I think you stabbed somebody and he recovered." Well, that's not what we want. We want you to get back to your roots. Well, I personally do feel that excessive violence is really a creative shortcoming. The writers, either in movies or books, can't come up with a clever way to create suspense like Alfred Hitchcock did. These writers just want the shower scene without the, and actually a very gruesome shower scene from Psycho without setting up the suspense. And Hitchcock was a very non-gruesome filmmaker. That's my model. I try to adhere to that as best I can. Well, but it was helpful what she told me. And so I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I will not take the camera away from the violence. Maybe in my next books, I will kill one or two more people. But again, remember, a brick wall, it's a speed bump. I've been doing this for a long time. I still get rejected. Short story mine was rejected about a year ago, and I was not willing to do the edits to get it in shape. I wrote something else that was accepted for this publication, but I submitted that rejected story to a publisher in England, and it was nominated, shortlisted for the Crime Writers Association Best Short Story of the Year. So go figure, one never knows. Okay, now we're up to chapter 8, Humorous Interlude. These are some famous rejection letters. I'm sorry, Mr. Kipling, but you just don't know how to use the English language. Your poems are as remarkable for defects as for beauties and are devoid of true poetical qualities. Emily Dickinson. It would be extremely rotten, to say nothing of being horribly cruel, should we want to publish this. Ernest Hemingway. It is impossible to sell animal stories in the United States. A rejection letter about Animal Farm by George Orwell. There isn't enough genuine talent here for us to take notice. Sylvia Plath. This novel will set publishing back 25 years. Norman Mailer. The author of this book is beyond psychiatric help. J.G. Ballard. For your own sake, I pray do not publish this book. D.H. Lawrence. You'd have a pretty decent book here if you got rid of that Gatsby character, to F. Scott Fitzgerald. And of course, my all-time favorite rejection letter. I don't think I even need to mention the author or the book. First, we must ask, my dear sir, does it have to be a whale? All right, let's look at chapter 9, and we're closing in on the end now. Chapter 9, the daily life of a writer. J.K. Rowling said this: be ruthless about protecting your writing days. That is, do not cave into endless requests to have, quote, essential and, quote, long overdue meetings on those days. The funny thing is that although writing has been my actual job for several years now, I still seem to have to fight for time in which to do it. Some people do not seem to grasp that I still have to sit down in peace and write the books, apparently believing that they pop up like mushrooms without my connivance. I must therefore guard the time allotted to writing as a Hungarian horntail guards its firstborn egg. Henry David Thoreau. Write while the heat is on you. The writer who postpones the recording of his thoughts uses an iron which is cooled to burn a hole with. Ray Bradbury. You must write every single day of your life. You must lurk in libraries and climb the stacks like ladders to sniff books like perfumes and wear books like caps upon your crazy heads. And out of that love for books, you will remake a world. Lee Child. Don't get it right, get it written. For me, it's simply a job. I work 8 to 10 hours a day. I do at least a book a year. I do probably four or so short stories a year. I was on the road 2 to 3 months out of the year. Now that, of course, has changed because of the COVID situation. I missed that year before last in 2019. I flew 180,000 miles on book tours. I miss that. I like meeting you in person. We will get back to that again. I read a great deal about the industry. I want to know what's going on. Are ebooks still doing well versus print books? What format print books are out there? It's a business. I need to be a marketing man. I'm active on social media. I have somebody who does that for me because I don't really, frankly, want to spend the time at it, and I'm not particularly good at it. So I treat it as a business, and I always have. And you may not want to do that. Sometimes I have writers in my class come up to me and say, I don't want to live that kind of life. It's very lonely. And I certainly understand that. Write when you find the time. And it may be maybe 10 years before you produce your book, and you might write part-time in between taking the kids to soccer, in between your day job, in between having dinner parties, whatever it is. That doesn't matter. If you want to write, you can find the time to do it, and don't be in any hurry. Well, finally, we're down to chapter 10, unless I have disillusioned you that this is all drudgery and a bit chaotic. Just remember the joy of writing. Truman Capote, to me, the greatest pleasure of writing is not what it's about, but the music the words make. Ray Bradbury, I've never worked a day in my life. I've been a writer. And Julie Meyerson, writing gives me such enormous pleasure, and I'm a much happier person when I'm doing it. Writing feels like something I simply couldn't live without. It's a joyous thing. I feel very lucky to be paid to do it, but even if I'd never been published, I think I'd still be writing. I love being read, but the person I'm really always writing for is me. Well, these are just a fraction of the thoughts that writers whom I respect have shared about the craft of telling stories. We can see how varied these authors are, and how varied the works they've created, how separated in time, geography, sensibilities, and vision they are. But if we step back, we can see one thing they all have in common, and that's the passionate desire to reach into the hearts and minds of readers and make them laugh, or make them cry, or in my case, make them scream in terror, or make them better understand the mad world we live in. And in doing so, make our time here on earth a little saner, a little richer, and a little more fun. And you can quote me on that last one. It's been a pleasure meeting with you. Everyone take care, and hope to see you in person sometime in the not too distant future.